There really is nothing quite like lively debate, the emotive language, the need to pick sides, and the desire to heckle. This we promise to invoke free of charge. My name is Benji, and this is the Marvel Champions Hero Tier List, up to and including the recent Vision and Valkyrie releases. Now, whilst I am the ultimate arbiter on placements, I need to give a shout out to the awesome community play login tool up on Board Game Geek and run by Dormammu, which provides the empirical backup for this list. We've also chosen not to do two lists distinguishing between solo and multiplayer this time, because although there are heroes that fare a lot better in multiplayer compared to their solo performances, there will only be so much in the way of chopping and changing between the two. But before we get the show on the road, please do subscribe to the channel to envelop yourself in the entertainment bubble and give that like button a good old touchy-feely too. Thanking you. We start then in chronological release date order with the core set, and it's just dawned on me how big this bloody list has become. Last time we placed 13 heroes, and today that number's a whopping 29. So yes, that means we'll be whizzing through this, but succinctness is surely better than waffle. Black Panther is up first, and all I remember is the sheer delight in this hero taking down Ultron's drones, which feels like an eternity ago. But his overall all-round power level is definitely in that above average column, and so he's our first entry in B tier. Captain Marvel is just so efficient with her economy, access to card draw on both sides of our identity and in her signature pool. You've then got the big finisher energy channel never too far away, meaning she more than deserves a spot in the A tier. Iron Man was the first and still one of the few setup characters, who is more tier of the biscuit when you first start a game, but keep yourself alive early game in solo and or have someone tank your damage in multiplayer, ultimately then allows Mr. Stark to go buck wild late game, more than warranting his spot in the A tier. She-Hulk is up next, rocking a very impressive hero side, albeit with a middling thwart capability. She suffers a little bit from a hit and miss signature deck, and so is only able to muster a spot in the C tier. Spider-Man then rounded out the core set and did so with the rarely seen native defense of 3, which gives him that innate ability to grind games out. Some economy both card wise and resource wise on his identity, and a signature deck with decent sustain means our Spider-Man sits pretty on the A tier. It's interesting to take a snapshot at this point because so many expandable card games suffer from power creep, in part because, marketing, but also because balance is a tricky thing and people get excited. Early indications here though suggest that that might not be the case, with no real duds found in the famous 5. But just to laugh in my grill, then came Captain America. The first standalone to be released, and my god was he and is he a wrecking machine. With perk after perk just on his identity, the goodness didn't end there with a solid as a rock signature deck. Hence, we pop this guy right up top as our first S tier entry. Oh Miss Marvel, the world just wasn't and still isn't ready for your awesome recursion and cycling all wrapped up in one little identity. You really needed to be good at sequencing and knowing what's in the deck to make the best out of her. But unfortunately she just lacked one or two really impactful cards, meaning she just sits below middle of the road in C tier. And then came a Thor, who had to manage with a hand size of 4 unless you could engage him to a minion. Thankfully you could somewhat force minion draw, and the whole package was one big tale of ups and downs. Too many good cards to be bad, too much holding him back to be truly great, resulting in his place in B tier. Black Widow was up next with a fairly high skill cap required to maximise her potential, and a fairly attritional back foot playstyle meant that she's difficult to lose with, but also tricky to get her over the finish line. Either way, she sits just above the average in B tier. But then along came Doctor Strange and his little invocation deck, which, whether you like it or not, single-handedly eked his power level right up to the dizzy heights. There are no weaknesses here. Welcome to S tier. Which begs the question why they followed up with, and it still pains me to say this, an absolutely turgid version of the greatest Marvel superhero, the not-so-incredible Hulk. I suppose thematically it made sense. There was no subtlety or nuance to Mr. Greenskin, but he's susceptible to any form of disruption, and an awful economy relegated this little piggy to E tier. Then came Hawkeye, helplessly left in the anticipatory shadow of Spider-Woman when they were both released with the rise of the Red Skull expansion. Hawkeye's biggest weakness was his fragility, but no matter which way you swing it, he's got some real offensive potency, and his suite of trick arrows are a lot of fun to play, leaving him in the mostly respectable position of C tier. But speaking of Spider-Woman, the bulk of that anticipation came from the deck-building warping capabilities she brought with her identity. She was and is a hell of a lot of fun to play, but also very, very strong on the table, more than warranting her spot in the "and then there were 3" S tier. The start of the next cycle of cards then saw Marvel champions go full team up. First with Ant-Man, who, as another first, brought more than 2 forms to the game. Picking between tiny and giant form is great fun, and with multifunctional triggers sprinkled throughout the signature deck, not only that, he's relatively kind to the beginner, while still offering a considerably high power level to the veteran cardsmith, giving him a well-earned place in A tier. The trick was then how to make Wasp not just a rinse and repeat. Well, for one thing, Ant-Man leaned heavily into form changing, and although Wasp still has 3 forms to choose from, she was a little bit more surgical with it. Plan to be in the right form at the right time and execute, with the help of a number of utility events. Those differences though still added up to an identity strong and powerful enough to couple up in A tier. Quicksilver was up next, and oh me oh my, he's a blast to play. Going full ready and exhaust on the bulk of your turns could sometimes see the RSI flare up, but despite the multiple swings with your basic powers, they did opt to rein the average potency of his signature deck back a bit, meaning he's only dude enough to lounge up in B tier. But would his sister Scarlet Witch fare any better? Well, if there was ever an identity that was designed to fly close to the sun, it was this one. With nigh on everything in her deck being empowered by discarding cards from the encounter deck, it was easy to be trepidatious about her potential win rate. But as time passed, it became clear the pros mostly always outweighed the risk, giving her the results to deserve her place in A tier. Groot, on the other hand, is just another example of a game system that just doesn't easily accommodate the big brutish guys in the Marvel Universe. To be fair though, they did try. I just think with his biggest weakness being the need to protect his growth counters, means he could never be super consistent. And here, to the tune of the D tier. Rocket Raccoon, on the very flip side of the size argument, was all about bringing weapons to bear, some even bigger than the little fella himself. The problem with Rocket though is there was too much in the way of conditional power, not just on his identity but on the bulk of his signature deck too, meaning that both identities in the Galaxy's Most Wanted box set would prop up the D tier. And things didn't really get much better with Star-Lord, because our Peter Quill decided to derive his power straight from drawing more cards from the encounter deck. Okay. Now don't get me wrong, I absolutely love playing discounted cards from my hand, but I also hate facing endless encounter cards even more, meaning we have one more passenger in the D tier. So whilst the Guardians may not have fared that well so far, things took a slight upturn with Gamora. Bringing once again some deck building shenanigans, I think it was clear she wouldn't hit the dizzying heights of Spider-Woman, but she might come damn near close. taking full advantage of the chip damage and threat removal of her hero ability, and packing a very tasty signature deck meant she was destined for A tier. Drax was up next, and I always look at him as the way to have tackled Hulk, clearly designing him with brute strength and wrap damage in mind, but giving him ways to mitigate his laughable hero hand size of 4. This was much better, but still only enough to put him up in B tier. And then along came a Venom, and in a bit of a sleeper sense he turned out to be a bit of a corker. The information's all there though. He's got such a solid platform to start the game with, respectable durability and a great deal of consistency in his damage output and versatility. His win rates are extremely impressive, but not quite enough for me to put him in S tier. Still very welcome in the A tier for now. Nebula was then the final Guardian to hit our table, and once again we found ourselves with a great all-rounder with good economy. Fetch access to her synergistic technique cards, but just a little too much mediocre in the signature 15, giving her a place in B tier. Adam Warlock was next on tap to get me mega excited, not necessarily from a power level perspective, but just awesome design. He's still such a fun identity to play, being the first singleton identity with an equal number of cards from each aspect a deck building requirement. It's ultimately his Robin Peter to pay Paul playstyle that keeps him from hitting the highest of heights. I'm still giving him a C tier for being too cool for school though. Spectrum on the other hand gave you much more proactive control of your game plan, once again rewarding good sequencing and choice of multiple forms. Her power level is only slightly hampered by her signature deck, meaning she'll have to be satisfied with her place in B tier. War Machine was always going to be interesting because of potential crossover with Iron Man's design, but instead they opted to go heavy on the firepower and give him a secondary resource of ammo. I really enjoyed how well rounded he felt with value seemingly on tap with his reusable supply of ammo, but there is something of an X factor missing here, meaning I'm plonking him in C tier for the time being. Vision on the other hand is basically all upside, plenty of offensive potency, some deck recursion, multifunctional cards, the ability to take a breath without going back to alter ego. This has A tier written all over it, and who knows, once the dust settles, he might even climb that ladder. And what a long and winding road it's been to this point as we come to place Valkyrie, and to be honest with you, it ain't good. She just doesn't bring anything super to the table. The mark target idea with her death glow feels like you're tied to something that's subpar and not particularly intuitive, leaving you on a low because she ain't worth much more than a place in D tier. And we made it. That was swish though, seeing them all up there on the board like little divas. How's it feel to be subjectified and judged, eh? Yeah, that's right. Come on then, have at it. What did I get wrong? What did I get oh so right? Let me know in the comments. Alas, I've been the voice of Benji, and this video has ended.